creating an EC2 machine, right, is to like click on instances. Let's do launch instance. Okay, so we have this quick start, right? And you can give it a name, like our web app. You can specify, what kind of software you want, right? And really the AMI. So that's like the Amazon machine image, and this specifies like the hardware that will be on it as well as the software. Um, let's see. So we have, maybe this is actually more, right? This seems like to be more the hardware, and this part, the machine image, this is the software. So like the particular bit of Linux that's going to be installed. I guess you can see also like the chip, like here we see the NVIDIA driver, it installs PyTorch on it, things like that. But each one of these gets an ID. You can see like the AMI, actually here's more easy to see. Here's the AMI ID, right? And then we have the instance type. You can see we need to set up, like a key pair, right, to SSH into the machine. There's a security group associated with it, etc. Like the amount of gigabytes we want stored in a hard drive. And then there's all these advanced settings. So we can click through and do all this. But in Terraform, you can see what this looks like in Terraform, at least just like a little bit, a kind of simple example. So the AMI, so here you can see, we're doing the provider. Let me close this down. So we're specifying the provider, AWS, US East 1. So, so this is, here you're kind of seeing like the resource type, and then here is the resource name. So here, like our resource is setting up a provider, which is essentially like saying you're specifying here, like are you using AWS, are you using Microsoft, and then what region are you going to be using there. And the rest of the infrastructure will be in that region. Yeah. So then the next thing is we also have our resource. We're saying this is a resource. This is the kind of resource. So AWS instance as opposed to like an RDS instance, right? This is like for EC2 machines. And then this backend server is our name. We could have called it something else. Okay. That's fine. It just needs to be, there can be no spaces here. And then inside here is the block where we're describing the resource. Each one of these has properties, right? So for us, we're describing, as we said, right, the piece of software. And this instance ID, right, you would first look at it by seeing which one, works for you. And then, the instance type, right, this is the hardware. So the AMI is the software, the instance type, that's our hardware. The key pair as well, actually, you could do key equals example, and that would, I think it's like that. Maybe I have it wrong. And that would be our, let me just check. Maybe I don't have that. We'll see. I'll look that up. I might have to look that up. But you can specify as well like the key that you want to use. By the key, I mean like the PEM file that we want to use. So all that configuration we can specify in the file. All right. I can Google that later. All right, and now we can, if you look inside the folder, all we have is this main.tf file. You should, whenever you're writing Terraform, it should be in a file with .tf, but you can call this whatever you want. So if you want, and like kind of as the code bases become more complex, right, you might start just like naming it other things like webapp.tf. And then to get started, the first thing we'll do is Terraform init. And you can see this is, using, making sure HashiCorp is the organization that, created Terraform. So you can see it's just, doing some initial setup. And what I believe it's doing is Terraform is a language written by this company, HashiCorp. But AWS has its own, let's see if we can open everything. AWS has its own, AWS like has its own like code So where that like its own infrastructure as code language, and Terraform has to essentially like interact with AWS's version. So this is like an easier way of interfacing with AWS's custom version. So the first thing we do anyway is Terraform init, and then from there we can do Terraform apply, and we type in yes. Before we are applying it, it tells us kind of like what is being created. So that like the public IP address, right? We'll know something like that after we apply it. We can say yes at this point. Okay, and now look at it. It's creating the AWS instance dot something else. So right, that was what we gave as the resource name. And what's happening now, the way that this is able to integrate with my account and probably should automatically work with yours is, remember we did the what did we do? We did like Botto configure. I think it was something like that, or I forget what it's called. Is it AWS? Yeah, AWS configure. Remember we did this for setting up the Botto library, and then this has our AWS access key. Terraform is using that same access key, which is stored in your .aws folder here. Okay, so it's reading from there, and from there is able to then interact with your AWS account. Okay, you can see that this has created. So it says created something with this ID 0B305. I should be able to now go to EC2 instances, and I need to refresh. Here it is. You saw that instance 1 is running. And then notice the name some backend. That's the name that I gave it right here. Some backend server, right? The same thing. And then the instance ID, that should line up to this guy right here, ID I0CB. So if you ever want to check to make sure like what you see in the console corresponds with what you created, you know, I0CB3B0. Okay, so all that, you can see it's still initializing, but it has been created. So what are the benefits of doing something like this? One is, you know, all this is code, so we can now save this in GitHub, right? It's just with our code base, essentially. You just have a folder called TF, and now you can, you know, save these files. So let's say we decide to upgrade the machine that we're using, either the hardware or the software, and now something breaks, right? One, we can go back in time. We can just revert the commit and go back to the old version we were using. Two, before we do that, we can ideally test the code. So maybe we do this deployment not directly to production, but to like a test environment, right? That users don't directly interact with, but we can, and make sure everything works fine before doing that. Three, like maybe we discover the bug, you know, months later, right? We can go back to the time that it was working. And not only do we have any software changes where, you know, our software is working, but we also have gone back in time, can go back in time to the hardware, right? So if there's an environmental issue, we can be even more secure that we're using the same environment, right? And can kind of see the delta between, you know, between like when it was working and when it was not, which can help us debug. All right. So, you know, those are two reasons, right? We can have this Git configuration. I really like it because I think it's actually easier to read as you start interacting with it. It's like easier to navigate and just see the state of your infrastructure as this thing becomes, you know, if you have multiple EC2 machines, etc. Like that becomes a little easier. The other thing you can do is you can, let's say you want more machines, like more EC2 machines spun up, right? Because let's say you have more users, etc. You can easily, I forget how to do this. It's something like number. It's as easy as doing something like number equals 2, and you can just start to then, you know, you can now get 2 of these EC2 machines instead of 1. All right, so like it's just like easy, you know, it's easy to automate, you know, replicating machines and replicating our infrastructure. And you can, you know, so we can do that if we want a test environment, or we can just replicate a component of it, and that can be, you know, useful if we run out of resources. All right. And then, right, for me, like really a big benefit is instead of clicking through AWS EC2 and starting to like see different components, I can now, uh, we can now just look through our code, and that can be a lot easier, right? Let's okay. Questions before I move on. In terms of like actually coding it out, that's not so. You'll find it's not so tricky. What's going to be harder is just when there's bugs, you're going to have to lean on your DevOps skills to like SSH into the machine, try to see what occurred, go step by step, reproduce the issue, right? And then, right, like reproduce the code and then configure it here, then translate all the steps you took into code. All right. So that's what you'll start to see.
Jeff, I think I missed something simple. Are you creating this TF file instead of going to the website, or after you set up your initial instance, are you then copying details to this file?
So, yeah, you wouldn't have to set up your initial instance, but this is probably the main piece of information you would want to have. But just for like that initial setup, you want to know like how are you going to know this number? The only way I would
Yeah,
know it is by going to the EC2, looking through which AMI I want to use, and then placing that in here. Unless someone like told you just saw this in some reading or etc. I think Conwell had a question. Okay, so actually Conwell's question is really nice. It's a good setup. So Conwell was asking, hey, can I like use Terraform to help us get to the URL without going to the console? And the answer is yes. So Terraform actually has a console. So you can go to Terraform console. I believe that's the command. Yeah, Terraform console. All right. And now we can do something like, so it would be AWS instance dot something else, right? So you type in the resource name first. So that's AWS instance. A reference. Oh, I guess I have to do at least a reference to the resource type must be followed by at least one attribute access specifying the resource name. So I have to specify the resource name, which is something else. So do dot something else. And now here you can, it's just like using like Python, essentially. Here you can see all the properties of this something else thing, including the public IP. Here it is, the public IP address. So if I want to, I can get that, and I can do AWS instance dot something else dot public IP, and that's the IP address that's listed on. I think there's also public. Is it public DNS? Yeah. So there's the DNS that's it's listed on. So for example, like you could, we'll start to see this, but you can start to like reference these different components in your code, right? Like you can imagine, right? Something that we'll do is eventually we're going to want to connect our RDS instance or our EC2 instance to our RDS, to our database. To do that, we're going to have to get the RDS's host, like where does it live? And so to do that, we can do like RDS instance dot whatever we call it dot the domain, and that's the host URL that will be like that will be the database URL that we want to connect to, like things like that, right? Like let's say we want to switch the port. Well, we can set the port that we want to run our website on as a variable, and then when we do that, not only can we like specify, we can actually move to that in a second. Not only can we specify the port in the security group, right? Like say, hey, we need to give HTTP access on this port, but we can also do it like when we do flask run -p, right? And that will be a variable, so that whenever this way we're making sure they're always consistent. Yeah. So okay. Can you do it in code? Yeah, you can do this. I can just show this easily, quickly. There's this thing called output. Um, so output, anything that you do in the console, that we do in this console, you can do in code, which is really nice. So we can do I not have it written down? I'm going to have to, sorry, I have to Google, how can I do output in an EC2 instance in Terraform? and show me an example using the key pair as well. Okay, so here they're doing what we did. They're creating a key pair. I think I can just use key name directly here. So they're having a separate resource of key pair, and they're saying where it's located. However, I already have my key pair, so I'm just going to put an attribute of key name equals example over here. Yeah, that. And the other thing that's nice is you see I was getting the autocomplete once I started doing it correctly. I get that because I have, I'll show you in a second, but VS Code has a Terraform plugin, which is really nice. So I'll do the key name is example, and just to show you that corresponds with down here, right? The key pair name is example, and then I have a PEM file called that. And then let's go back to ChatGPT. It was telling us it's just called output, and then we can call this whatever I want, and then same thing. So we can do, this is like the output, and then we can do we can call this whatever I want. So what we were talking about is the DNS, right? We'll do output EC2 DNS, and that would be AWS instance dot something else, and obviously we would call this something better, dot public DNS. Right, and now we exit out of here, exit, and now we just do Terraform apply again. Terraform will only make the necessary change, it won't, if you haven't changed anything in the file, it won't change your infrastructure. It will kind of calculate first what does it need to change to get to where you want to go. So in this case, it probably does need to recreate the EC2 machine probably because we're changing the key name, and that might only be able to be accomplished when you're first initializing the machine. So you can see it's doing that, right? First it's destroying this machine, it's still destroying it, and then it's going to create a new one. All right, so that's pretty nice for us. It's cleaning up automatically for us where it's not able to update the machine. And now it's creating the new one. And then at the end of this, right, it will output the DNS, the domain name. Alright, so this is still taking a second. But yeah, so this is kind of one example of it. We'll see the output gets spit out. Here it is. So the output, EC2 DNS, that comes from here. This has an attribute of value. Whatever you specify as the value equals, that's what's going to be displayed. Okay. Another example, maybe and so you can see this, right? But you can imagine, right, we could do something like, what's pretty cool as well is this can take string interpolation. So you could say something like, hey, to SSH into the machine, go to, right, or type in, right? And what would it be? It would be like SSH -I, the key name, right? It would be AWS instance dot something else dot key name dot PEM. And I need the $sign in front of this for it to be dot key name dot PEM. And then I forget if it's like EC2 home. I'd have to look at it. But these instructions can be printed out for us. Okay, can we stop the instance using Terraform as well, or change security? Okay, so let's do the security one first. So let's say we want to do a security group for Terraform. So you can imagine, right, we need something like that for our EC2 instance. So there's a couple things. One thing that we can do, by the way, which is pretty nice, is we can do an initial setup of Terraform, meaning like when this machine boots up, what do you want to run in the console? Like what do you want to run like in Bash? So why would something like that be useful? It's useful because, well, let's say even if we want to like download Docker, right? We're gonna have to install. Remember, we had to do like sudo yum docker install Docker. We can automate that through the this user data argument. So in this case, what I'll do is just do. I think I'm copying this, so I hope I'm doing this right. Echo hello world, and this is like an example that is kind of typical. And this will place this. So this was just output this text to the terminal and then place it in the index.html file. And then this is the only thing I'm unsure of. This piece of software probably already has something called BusyBox, which is just like a simple web server where all you do is you specify, like it's just going to render this index.html. So here we're just, saying like, hey, I want to run BusyBox, and then I want to run it on port 80. So that's what I want to be listed on, and this ampersand means run it in the background. Okay, so we could have SSH'd and done this. Here, this should just boot up a web server that says hello world and do this. But to actually get access to it, what we'll need to do is have a security group. So that's a separate resource we need to create. So do resource is of type AWS security group. And then we can call it whatever, web app security. And then have our block. And now, you don't have to give it a name. Typically you do. The only thing to keep note of is in Amazon, you can only, each security group name has to be unique. So sometimes you'll get an error saying like, hey, you've already created something with that name. We'll just web app example security. And then we'll set a rule. So if we were going to create a security group, let's just show you. Remember, if we were going to create a security group, we would say something like allow HTTP access from anywhere. So that would be, all zeros. And then we would want to give access on port 80. So the way that we do that here is you say like from port equals 80. So this is how the user will access it. So the user will go to port 80, and this will, they'll make a request to port 80, and that will go to port 80 on our EC2 machine. And then we say protocol is TCP, which is web protocol. And then CIDR blocks, this is who do we want to access it. This is that 0.0.0 thing, /0. I think this will be good. Okay, so here we're creating a security group. What we need to do, of course, is we need to attach the security group. Like, this creates a security group, but it does not associate it with this EC2 instance. So to do that, you need to place in the security group ID. Right? We have to associate this guy with this guy. And to do that, we just say VPC, security group IDs equals. And this is a list. And then we want to say AWS security group dot web app security dot ID. I think it's as simple as that. So this is going to get the ID. It's like going to create this. Once this is created, we'll have an ID that identifies this, and then we'll associate this rule or this security group with this EC2 instance. All right. This EC2 instance will, run this ideally on port 80. Give it this name, and then, that should be it. And then give access to it to the public web, and then we could, this will print out the DNS for us. Let's look at, I'm just curious, do I have an instance? I'm curious what the command is for connecting. So it'd be ssh.I example ubuntu at.
Very good.
So we can do this. Ubuntu at AWS something else. That should be it. Let's do Terraform apply. Okay, so first it gives me a preview of what's occurring. So you can see here's the AWS security group. This is something new, right? From port to port, the name of it. Then we get to see this is the instance. Here's the security group ID. You can see, I guess it already gave it an ID. That's interesting. And then this is the name that will reference it. This is the new ID of the instance. This, I guess, is some hash form of the instructions we gave. And we'll just say yes. And look, this is kind of cool too. It already shows us our output, right? Like this was the original one, was this, and it's getting changed to this one. So it's a really nice interface to show you all the changes that you're making. And then it's applying it. We should see, so in this case, if it's not recreating the machine, I guess it's calculated, does not need to recreate it. Instead, it's modifying it, right? Because it didn't go through a destroying of that EC2 instance. So it created the security group. We can see that. Well, we'll see in a second when we get to the EC2. Actually, I wonder, because it's the same EC2 instance. So if I go to here, this panel, maybe it shut it down. Let's see. Let's take a look. So this is the instance ID. Let's see if it matches this one. So it must now. So it says AWS something else, ID I0362, I0362. If we click on it, let's go to security. We can see it has a security group rule ID, and look, this is the security group, web app example security. That comes from this name here. All right, and then if you click on it, you can see this. Here's our port. We can always, click on it, and then I guess click on it again. And then, yeah, so this is port 80, kind of give anyone access to it, right? So that looks pretty good. And then it should have told us the IP address, which is this, EC2. I think that's the domain name right there. Port 80, which is, and it should HTTP ://. It might not work. Let's see. It doesn't feel good, does it? Let's see. So let's see what happened. So if you have a bug like this, which you for sure will, or at least I've ran into tons of them, how would we debug this? So we want to SSH into the machine, essentially. So that was, let's use Terraform console. Actually, we'll just use connect. So we'll go into the EC2 instance. The instance is running. Instance ID, connect. Let's just SSH into this and see what occurred. What my guess is, either I typed something wrong, or we may not have that piece of software on the computer. So I think I can go to /./SSH/example.pem. Let's just see. In SSH-I, I typed this wrong. Oh, /. Sorry. // It should just be like that. It looks so weird. I think it's that. No such username. I'm going to have to look at it.
.ssh.
Is it just .ssh?
Well, we take out the.
No, I need to be in the direct. Anyway, it's all right. Let's just.
So the /.ssh, I think.
So it's like this. Yeah, that works.
Yeah.
Cool. SSH-I. /. There you go. Oh, no such user. Wait, here it's not giving me an error. We're doing okay. But normally it's able to connect a little easier than this.
Did you have to say TF?
No, it should be dot.
It should just be SSH and then the.
Yeah, so we're.
Oh wait, I'm sorry, I misread that.
Yeah, let me just. So it's just coming directly from this connect thing. SSH-I example.pem. Unless we can, and we can also just go into my SSH folder. Let's see if that's any easier. Yeah, I don't know why it's weird. Unless this instance, let's just make sure this instance is up and running. We have it. Connect. EC2 SSH-I example.pem. Do this. Yeah, I don't know why we're running into an issue, gang. But that's what I would do is SSH into the machine, and then you want to basically, the issue is we don't see any of the errors here, right? Like our thing isn't running, but we don't know what the error is. So I would SSH into the machine and then run this line by line and make sure that it works. And then if this works successfully, it should work in, when you're just running it. And you should be all right. Let's see. Yeah, so here we're not getting it. Port 80. And I don't know why I'm not. Yeah, I'm not able to debug this, unfortunately. I don't know why, unless anyone has an idea. Oh, it's port 22 open on the EC2. That is a good point, Micah. Thank you. All right, so let's do that. That should at least allow us to SSH into it. So we'd have to create a new security. We could create a new security group. I think we could also just create a new ingress rule and say from port 22 to port 22, protocol, probably SSH, and then the same thing. Again, like I typically, to be real, I always have to ask Terraform or just Google how can I allow SSH access on an EC2 machine, or let's say create a security group. For SSH access on an EC2 machine using Terraform. So that was like a perfect example. It was like our understanding of AWS and cloud computing rather than Terraform that saved us. So here, this is really what we need, is just this ingress rule, and the protocol is also TCP. Okay, so that you can see we added here, and now we should at least be able to access it. Let's try again with Terraform apply. Say yes. What did I mess up? Sets code request ID, line 20 in AWS Web App Security. Let's take a look. Resource, what does this say? Stats code 400. Resource. Ingress rules, authorizing security group, invalid parameter value SSH for IP protocol. Did I type in SSH? Oh, I did not replace this. This should be TCP. But you see the error? This error is actually very nice. Invalid parameter value, invalid value, SSH for IP protocol, unknown protocol. Right? So that's pretty specific here. Let's try it again. And it's doing that before it starts to try to make the changes. And this applied it. And now we can confirm it by going back to AWS, go to the instance, go to eventually you'll just trust it. You won't have to do all this. Go to the security group. Here we can see this looks like, right? It's applied. Same security group, but two rules, right? And we did this by having a separate ingress block in the same rule. And now we should be able to go to connect and do that same thing. Let's go over here. And I need to do .com. Okay, and now we're in, right? And now the next thing would be, for me, would be just understand why this is not working. So it's like, do we have, that's weird. So we didn't have this hello index.html. So there it's created. I don't really know why it's not here. And now let's see if this occurs. So now we'd have to debug this. I mean, we don't have to do this now, but you can see the process of debugging, right? It's like this script didn't work, so now we'll just have to Google it and figure this part out. My sense is it's probably, like I said, some of the AWS instances don't play well with these pieces of software. So then either we would just change the AMI. You would have to change this, or to figure out for one that does have BusyBox on it, or we can just find an alternative piece of software where it would work. Okay, so that's how I would debug, and you can see, right, like how, like this was pretty useful, right? You can just see the state of it pretty quickly, and then when you're done, you have to do all this from your TF folder, but then you can just you can type Terraform destroy, and that will destroy everything listed there, right? So it will destroy. Do you really want to destroy your resources? So not only not only your instances, but also the security groups will be destroyed. Yeah, thanks, Chuma. Yes, so Chuma caught that. Yeah, and I did run into this when I was writing the curriculum, and it was something. It was just like the wrong piece of this AMI was just didn't have some of the software, I think. So yeah, you just run Terraform destroy, and then that destroys it. What's really nice, like I really like using the console as well as a way to just see, like, what are the different properties I have on a resource, and then make sure I'm doing them properly, just like a Python console. Make sure that the code works properly there, and then you can move it over. You can also use things like split, like splitting a string into a list, and then just selecting the first element from a list. So you can start to manipulate these strings if you need to, and eventually you probably will, programmatically as well, right? Things like that become really useful. All right, so that's what we're moving through in the curriculum.